Yeah, thanks for everyone for being here. It's been a fun group to be a part of for a number of years. I find one of the things I enjoy about these kinds of presentations is I like listening to others, learning from others, and kind of running my own monologue of, oh, that's good, I can take that, and I would do it a different way, and kind of um, filtering new ideas through sort of my approach. So I'm going to sort of try to embody that in this. The other thing I'll mention with this, so Wei had reached out to me, and I think initially his comment was something like, "Let us know what you're doing at Colorado." So, in case anyone doesn't know, not that anyone I would expect would know, but for those of you who I don't happen to know before this, I was at Arizona State University up until last year. So, not this just wrapping up year, but the year before, till 2023. And in 2023, moved to University of Colorado Boulder. It still looks like my position is the same. So on paper, it feels like, oh, you're doing the same thing. But as some of you, and we've talked about your situation, someone who's maybe moved institutions can probably relate. Sometimes shifting institutions, the new people, the new place, the new everything still leads to kind of a restart and a rechurning of ideas. So I kind of took Way's initial invite of, tell us what you're doing in Colorado, for me to almost reflect back on what do I want to take with me from Arizona State University? Like, I was there for 9 years. What did I gain from this? So I'm going to offer some food for thought. I want to try to distill what I'm talking about today to three major topic areas. But I also want to just sort of introduce the idea that I'm going to offer these as ideas. They may be something that you can use. They may be something that you say, I don't need that. I'm almost, if anything, not teaching you what to do. I'm sort of pointing the finger at myself and being like, these are things I need to embody because I think I wasn't very good at these when I was starting up. So I want to talk a little about my research and teaching today and some of the ways that I approach this. So for today's presentation, I think I'm going to try to organize the anecdotes I discussed into sort of three categories or 3 points that I want to hit on, and we'll pepper it with anecdotes. So, first point that I want to talk about is something that is not smart. It's not controversial. It's not even new to you. It's just something that I think we sometimes fail to do in technology focused environments. When we are looking at technology as an intervention for either research or teaching or both, I think we need to remember that technology is just a tool to support or serve human users. Again, I know that's not smart. It's not controversial. You know it. I know you know it. But I think if we're being honest, and if we look at how a lot of research and teaching is done, we can spot a lot of examples where people kind of forget this. And they say, did you see the new thing Apple put out? We got to get one of these. Did you see the new ChatGPT? Did you try the, and we get really dazzled. And again, I'm pointing the finger at myself because I also fall into that trap. The problem I see with that is not that there's something wrong inherently. It's just that if you start with a technology and search for areas to apply it, it's a solution in search of a problem. And I think frequently it either won't work or you won't know why it worked because we didn't start by defining a problem. So I really try to embody this one. Second point I want to cover today. This is something that I definitely am pointing the finger at myself. I was not good at when I started as a faculty member. I think we as faculty need to do less, not more, to support our students' learning. That's not my way of saying we should be checked out or not invest in their success. What I'm talking about is within the real estate of the classroom environment or time you have with your students or experience where they are under your guidance. I think we, the faculty, should shift the way we look at ourselves from sort of distributors of tidbits of knowledge to instead almost like coaches, right? The track coach will run fewer laps around the track than their athletes. And I think that's what we ought to be doing. We should be guiding the students to put in more work so they can gain greater learning gains than us making more detailed slides with even more information that will distribute more of this. I think we need to do less, not more. So I'll talk about some of the strategies I've tried to embody there. Last one, anyone who has spoken with me in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years has probably heard this topic come up. I would say I'm passionate about failure, but maybe a more accurate telling is I'm obsessed with failure. Since getting tenure at ASU, I immediately kind of felt after getting the, oh, you have this tenure decision, I immediately felt like I think they've made a terrible mistake because I don't think I'm worthy of this, right? And I don't think I'm special. I think a lot of us have these kind of self-doubts, whether or not we choose to admit them. And so what I've tried to embody is that if we can celebrate failure, and the shortcomings we've had and the ways in which our work hasn't been ideal, and we can also own the learning that comes through it, we can almost guarantee success by embracing failure. So failure is good if you can learn from it. So these are what we're going to talk about. These are sort of our milestones we're going to cover today. So the first one, technology is just a tool to serve human users. I think this is something that's sort of obvious in premise, but as I mentioned briefly earlier, I think a lot of research sometimes forgets that. And maybe through the excitement of new technology that comes out, kind of looks at what can we do with technology rather than what should we do. So what I've tried to do, and I'm going to try to continue to do in my research, is to start by defining the problem. Start by defining the ways in which a human user or group of human users are not adequately served by the status quo, whatever that may mean for a given situation. I think in doing that, it does a few things. I think first, it offers research that might actually matter, right? That might actually serve someone and maybe offer some good to the world. But also more selfishly, from the researcher perspective, I think it's a way of defining outputs or metrics or contexts or situations that we can very specifically observe to know whether or not some new technology actually offered value. I think when we start with a technology in search of a problem, often it's not necessarily a good or a bad idea. It's just a we don't know if it worked because the problem hasn't been well enough to define to know. So I'll give a couple examples of my research where we'll talk through this. This is an older example, but this is one that I think really illustrates this premise of start with the problem. It's just a tool for human users well. So this is a study that I had done a few years ago. It's funded by sort of two organizations, Electri International and National Science Foundation. And essentially, the way I describe this, if I'm presenting this to someone not in our field, it often sounds crazy what we do, right? Because I say we in sort of the architecture, engineering, construction domains, we make a product, right? That's not specific to our field. Lots of fields do. But unlike the vast majority of fields that produce a tangible thing, generally speaking, the thing we're making, the airport, the hospital, the school, the interchange, the bridge, generally speaking, that thing has never been made before. Right. So we've got this product, at least in totality. Pieces of it have, sure, but in totality, that thing has generally never been built before. The team of people that partner to build that thing, architect, engineer, contractor, subs, owners, facility managers, that team that gets together to make and design that thing that's never been built before, generally speaking, has never worked together before. Right. And if that weren't challenging enough, we expect the outputs of their efforts to work on the first try. I don't get to build 3 hospitals hoping the fourth one finally works. That first one's got to work, which is kind of crazy. And this has given rise to building information modeling, or some people will call it virtual design and construction. Generally, what we're talking about are 3D, intelligent, data-rich, parametric models. And I would argue most of the value of these models is not really in succeeding. It's actually kind of in failing. It's just in failing really early and really cheaply. If I run a clash detection report on my mechanical and plumbing systems in BIM, that is not free. That costs time and effort to model and remodel until they're fixed. But hopefully it's way, way, way less expensive than finding those same issues in the field, right? Where I'm going with this is we make these models on our projects that provide value downstream, but cost a lot of money initially. If we look at how we communicate this to our field personnel who actually put the kind of bricks and sticks together in the field, by and large, what we do and what is contractually prioritized is we take this expensive 3D data-rich model, we dumb it down to paper plans, we give out 300, 500, 600, however many hundreds of sheets to field personnel. We say, here's a bunch of 2D images that suggest a 3D concept, but we're not going to share the model with you. You need to go on these as the contract documents. Those field personnel then create mental models, whether or not they would call them mental models, right? They create an interpretation of what they think we want them to build. And best case scenario, their mental model matches the BIM we started with. Now, this seems really silly, right? Because it seems slow and prone to error. And this is why I suggest start by defining the value for the human user, not because I know if some technology will fix this, but I know our current process is slow and prone to error. So if I'm a researcher and I want to study if something is improved, I already know 2 of my metrics. How fast does it take and how many errors does someone make? So in this study, we happened to look at augmented reality, and we said, what if we just took that expensive data-rich BIM that we're already making and take these increasingly affordable tools, augmented reality, and just let people use it to build? So we did, right? This was a study where I worked with practitioners in Arizona. We almost set up, you can see there's a wall in the center there, almost like when you played Battleship when you're a kid. So I can't see what someone on the other side's doing, right? So we had one person on one side building with augmented reality, someone on the other side building with traditional paper. And maybe not surprisingly, you could indeed build faster and with fewer errors with augmented reality. I don't actually think the takeaway is that augmented reality is good. I think the takeaway is that we aligned the attributes of AR, augmented reality, that are beneficial to a problem that required those, right? It was more of start with the problem. We even went to a next step just to have a bit of fun with this and say, what if someone didn't have experience? Could we give this to middle schoolers and have them build? By the way, in short, generally the answer is yes, so long as they can pick up the materials. If they're too heavy, that becomes a physical limitation. But they understand design attributes. So when we talk about reskilling or upskilling or bringing others from other industries into construction to fill labor shortages, there are opportunities to leverage this technology there. So this was an exciting study, but again, I think part of why it worked was because we started with defining a problem. Another study I'll talk about, Wei, you'll like this one. Feel free to jump in if I misspeak on this. But this was a study we did a couple of years ago here, where we looked at using augmented reality for providing authentic educational experiences. So the team in this project essentially started with the notion or sort of the concept of saying, we think the best way for students to learn how to design and build a building is to design and build a building, right? Solar decathlon or some of the tiny home competitions, something where students are actually applying abstract concepts into practical contexts, right? Which I don't know that that's particularly smart as a starting point. I think most would probably agree with that, but that's really uncommon, right? Because it's expensive and it's time consuming and it's not easy to provide those experiences. So we looked at here was saying, can we take the parts of the experience that are expensive, that hinder access? So offering lumber that students can use to build, and can we augment them, right? Those are going to become virtual. But the parts of the aspects of the project that are inexpensive but beneficial, like the paper drawings, I still have concerns with them, as I talked about in the last study, but they're necessary for students to learn. Can we give them real paper or real measuring tapes or real, you get the idea. And so that was what we did, right? So we looked at studies where we would ask students to virtually build different elements, and we would give them spaces where some of their work was done with physical objects that weren't resource intensive, that wouldn't hinder their access, and other things that would be resource intensive, we would augment. This was kind of interesting because it was done right at the beginning of COVID, right? When kind of everything was a little strange, if we're being honest, right? It was uncomfortable and a little weird time for us all. And so we actually had to do this with enhanced cleaning procedures. We couldn't even have a research assistant in the room conducting the experiment. Really interesting kind of time, but it was a fun study that, again, what we were looking at there was how this human user, in our case, students, could learn concepts similar to the way they might learn in practice or through authentic learning for hopefully a lot less money with using augmented reality. I'll talk through one other example of research and then I'll shift to the next topic. So this was a study that's been just sort of wrapping up, but was a lot of fun as well. Here, I was not looking at augmented reality, but virtual reality, so purely synthetic environment with haptic feedback for safety was essentially what we're studying here. And so this team, another group of cross-disciplinary folks here, we were looking at the way that students learn about construction safety. So part of the motivation for this started from when I started at Arizona State University. I know there's nothing on the screen. We'll get there in a second. But when I started there, we would have our safety days, and we would have someone from industry come into the classroom and talk to our students and talk about the importance of construction safety. I started in 2014, which is about 10 years ago. So for some people who I don't know, right, you may say this guy speaking doesn't look qualified to be a professor. 10 years ago, I looked even less qualified. So the point I'm bringing up is I was a little nervous, right? I was trying to figure things out, trying to figure out how do I become a teacher here? How do I do this thing? And I would have these industry people, right, who have a little more salt and pepper in the hair come into the classroom, who've had experience more than I had. These people would look at my students. And I can remember the first year this happened. It was really kind of scarring in like a good way. The person that came into the room looked at my students and said, you know, when I was in your shoes, I didn't care about safety until. And he told this story of this guy he worked with who was in a trench. And he told him not to go in the trench. It wasn't shored up yet. Was in the trench doing work. The trench collapsed in, and our speaker was the one that got to call this guy's wife to say he's not coming home. And it was one of those moments that was like everything I'm this new, inexperienced teacher is thinking, there's BIM and technology, and let me talk about this. It was like none of this matters, right? Like this is real here, what we learned there. And it was really like an impact. It was kind of an emotional moment in the classroom when he's telling the story. And I remember thinking, wow, what a service this guy did for these students. Like now that's going to land, right? So next semester we have our safety days, right? Someone else comes in the classroom. They've got salt and pepper in the hair. They've seen more things than me, right? They've got another experience. And I'm thinking this will be good, but it won't be as good as the last one because how could it be? That was like a gut punch, right? And so this person comes in the classroom and they say, when I was in your shoes, I didn't care about safety until, and it's a different, equally horrible story. Next semester, when I was in your shoes, I didn't care about safety until a different, equally terrible story. So then it's like, all right, well, this calculation is starting to change in my mind because I'm going from this is an emotional gut punch to now it's almost annoying to me because I find myself saying, so when you were in their shoes, you knew safety could be a concern, but you didn't care. It didn't feel real until a terrible thing happened. Well, then why should our students? Right? Like I could give them a quiz and ask, is texting while driving safe? And they'd correctly answer, no. And if I said, but have you ever done it? Right? We'd all probably say, well, yeah, I've done that. Right. So you get the idea here. So what we wanted to do with virtual reality is use it for construction safety training. Not new, by the way. Lots of people have done this. What differed in this study is most studies would have people walk around and find hazards. And when they missed hazards at the end of the experience, they'd get a report card that says you found 8 of 10 hazards or 9 of 10 or whatever. And the assumption in a lot of prior studies is if you can identify hazards, then you will act upon that knowledge and practice. I think that is a wildly unwise assumption to make, bordering on unethical, because it leads to a whole lot of work we're doing in the spirit of safety that may actually distract or fail to offer any practical value for safety. So what we wanted to do was look a little bit more at the stories we heard of, I didn't care about safety until I saw the bad thing. Let's put people in a virtual environment, have them navigate, and when they miss something, right, let them see what would happen. Don't just give a report card saying, hey, you missed this. Let's give a artificial virtual experience that elicits real psychological reactions that might enact behavioral change was the idea. So here, what we did is we actually modeled a site, put in a lot more time in the tech side because it had to look sufficiently realistic, right? We would model in certain hazards. You could see there's a struck by hazard. They're doing a pipeline work and this person would have gotten hit. And so the idea was to see how does this technological intervention impact the human user? So in one case here, you can see a slightly more refined version. You know, there's little particulate effects and there's heat waves and there's sound and there's loud noises. So we've got this person in this environment. They're in a virtual environment. They've got noise canceling headphones on, and they're also wearing vibration or haptic based feedback suits. The idea is almost like in a scary movie, if at the moment when the monster lunged at the screen and the violin shrieked and the flash of light happened, if at that moment someone came into your dark room and tapped you on the back, right, you'd probably leap out of your seat, right? The movie without the tap on the back or the tap on the back without the movie probably wouldn't get the same reaction. But those two together, we thought, well, this might be really uniquely well suited to eliciting a realistic reaction. And so that's why we did this. So this is one of our collaborators who knew a hazard was coming and still kind of jumped a little when he saw it. And so this was another study we did, again, to hopefully help the human user here. We're not trying to do the safety thinking for them. What we're trying to do is prepare them so that when they go out into their careers, they have some experience where maybe they could say, when I was in your shoes, I didn't care about safety until I did this virtual experience that didn't actually hurt anyone, but kind of scared the hell out of me, right? Like that was kind of the motivation of what we were going for here. It was actually a lot of fun to work on this study and found some interesting results. But anyway, the takeaway back to this first point I'm making here is I think this is something that I've sometimes made some mistakes in terms of how I've set up research, and is now something I really push toward my grad students and would encourage others to embody as they see fit to their research. Start with the problem. Remember that technology is just a tool to serve human users. The next point I want to transition to is I think from a teaching perspective, I I become more and more convinced as technology makes it easier to produce base level knowledge and find information and generate text with some of the tools out there. I think we as faculty to remain relevant in the foreseeable future, we need to do less, not more, to support our students' learning. And I think we need to take the opportunity that we enable in our classrooms for space now to have the students do more. In that same line of logic, I think we need to start seeing ourselves more as coaches rather than sort of distributors of knowledge. I think that's an important paradigm shift, but it can be uncomfortable too. So I'll talk about some of the approaches I've taken. So when I started, I taught a course on building information modeling, and I would talk about collaboration's important. I can take 45 minutes and I can tell students collaboration's important. And maybe at the end, I can ask them a true false question that says true or false, collaboration's important, right? They can answer it, but how well does that land? One of the things I've tried to do less and have the students do more is take an activity that I actually didn't create. So I will be sure to give attribution here, but take an activity where we do negotiations with BIM. So I like to joke with the students like Hamlet, you've got to be or not to be. This is to BIM or not to BIM. And we've essentially created, I say we, John Mester and Ralph Kreider really did the development of this. I've leveraged some of what they've created. An activity where the students will divide into different groups and assume the roles of owners, designers, or constructors. Maybe not surprisingly, designers and constructors will sell their services, right, related to BIM in this case, and owners can buy their services. And essentially what we do for students is give each group a subset of information that they know some of their own information, but they don't necessarily know others' information. And I give them time to negotiate. And basically the only thing I do to prime my students, and this is all that I need to offer to give the kind of challenge for this learning activity, is I tell them when you go into your negotiation with whatever the other two are, if you're the owner, then you negotiate with a designer and contractor. When you go into those negotiations, you can volunteer any information to those other parties that you want. But once you tell them something, you cannot untell them something, right? And all I'm doing there is I'm just planting a little seed of, okay, we've got to have our wits about us and be risk averse here. And that's just enough that when I bring them back into the room and they start their negotiations, I've got students almost yelling at each other, at least getting heated, right? I've got students cursing out others in a sort of a polite-ish, sort of as polite as that can be, I guess. That this four-letter word, but he's not negotiating, she's being difficult, right? And we essentially create this environment where they get to, oh, if I don't work with the others, BIM becomes very expensive because now I can't just use the model that the architects use. I have to recreate it, and that costs me more, so it takes more of my time, right? And they get the same learning that I could have told them in a 45-minute lecture. Collaboration is important, but they get it with sort of the gravity of, I'm going to say, suffering intellectually through this process and struggling and kind of disliking some of it and the difficulty with it. And I think this is a good version of kind of what I was talking about. Like, I think we, the teacher, should do less. The students should do more. I think this is a good way of kind of embodying that. Another one, this one, I messed this one up pretty badly when I was starting, right? So I would have students do BIM execution plans, right? An important part of planning for BIM. So if you're not familiar, this is just a plan for how you intend to implement BIM on a given project, right? That's basically what an execution plan is. I found in the past this is important, but students sometimes struggle with it. So I would give the students feedback. And the old method that I would do is I would try to give students feedback mid-semester. So I'd review all of the execution plans that would come in. But as we grew and grew and grew, and the course sizes got bigger, and we got to a point where I'm now teaching multiple sections, I didn't have the bandwidth to give all of these student groups feedback on their execution plans. So what I've started doing is more of a peer evaluation approach, right? So what I gravitated toward was saying if we have groups of 3 or 4 students in a group developing a BIM execution plan, I'm going to take their mid-semester deliverable and I'm going to give it out to other students in the class, and they will be required for their own grade to evaluate others, right? So think about what this effectively means. If I have each person in that group individually reviewing two different groups' PXPs, now I've got 4 people in a group who have to review 2 others that they didn't author. And then when they come back to review their own, they now have 8 different ones that they've reviewed. That might be 8 sets of insights they can bring back to the team. But also, it means when I give the teams back their own feedback, that one team that made one PXP or project execution plan effectively gets 8 sets of feedback. And so what I would do then is almost like some of the research active folks know, when you go to submit a journal paper or sometimes a conference paper, right, for a peer review process, you often have to respond to the feedback that you get. I made my students do the same thing. I said, whatever feedback you got, I want left column, what they told you, right column, what did you do to address it, right? So if you're not going to take feedback, that's fine, but you have to tell me why. I gave up a little bit of control in this process, and this is a running theme in the do less, not more to support teaching. I gave up a little bit of control, but I think what I got back was students who have an ability to evaluate and an ability to critically think and an ability to apply concepts from one context to a different context, from one group's PXP to their own. And I think that's a sacrifice that's worth it. So I find myself saying again, I keep going back to this idea that I think as I move forward and I'm kind of moving to this next phase in my career as a teacher, I think I want to be doing less, not more, to support my students' learning so that they can do more of the lifting. Last point I'll go to here is about failure. I think societally and definitely in academia, I think we wildly undervalue failure. I don't even, this is borderline platitudinal to say too. Like, I don't think this is smart or controversial. I feel like all of us probably know this to some extent. I just think we have systems in place that don't celebrate failure to the point where some people will maybe not embrace it. And I think missing the opportunity to embrace failure misses the opportunity to learn from it. So I've really tried to celebrate failure and talk about all the ways that things haven't gone well. As it relates to teaching, this is something where I think there's also opportunities to embed failure in a good way. Sometimes it bugs me a little bit that the way we teach in our traditional evaluation environments, we have this A through E or A through F, depending on how your institution does it, where A's are good and C's and D's and F's are bad. But those aren't really metrics of learning. That's more performance. And so I think if we can put in ways that students can fail in the process of learning, where failure is actually encouraged or a part of the learning that can lead to the A, I think it can also lead to better learning experiences. So one approach I did for this was one where I called it sort of bring your own project. So when I was at Arizona State University, listening to our graduate students, or I should say our undergraduate students upon graduation when they'd have their exit interviews, they'd be asked about the program and we would ask things like, how was it? What could we do to be better? And generally students said, we like the program, but you never taught us blah, blah, blah technology or software, whatever it was they heard about in their internship that they felt they should have learned in the classroom. Maybe stating the obvious, we don't have the capacity to teach every potential software or technology out there. And maybe even more importantly, I don't think we should. I don't think that's a good use of every student's time to have to learn a day's worth of every possible technology. But I did think it was an opportunity to change the way we covered technology in our undergraduate curriculum. So what I worked with a grad student to do is develop a new project that almost kind of made the students submit a proposal. It's almost like if you ever did the Mad Libs when you were a kid, where you have to insert a noun or an adjective or whatever. It was sort of like that. I would have students submit these proposals where I would provide the format. So I put the line that says, I will learn, and then there's a blank. And the student would have to come up with what software or hardware title, what is the actual product they want to use in order to, and then they'd have to tell me, what am I going to produce? Is it a JPEG? Is it a model? Is it a video? Is it a set of audio? Is it a report? Like, what is the output you will deliver to me? And this would enable me to target, why would I care? Like, practically speaking, why would this offer any value in a practical context, right? So they'd have to define this as well. So I'd present this all to students. Spirit of transparency, week 1, when I'd present it, students loved it because they were like, I can do whatever I want. This is amazing. By about week 10, they were like, well, this software is not working. What do you want me to do? My answer is, I don't know. I don't know that software. Figure it out, right? So there is a bit of a challenge with this too, but I think that was good for the learning. In terms of how we evaluated this is one thing I'll mention here, especially for the other faculty who may elect to use or not use or what have you. So essentially what I would have them deliver out of this, they're doing work on a software that I don't know, producing a thing that either I can't see or maybe I can see in the case of an image, but I may or may not know what went into that output exactly. And essentially the practical problem, I can review it of kind of does it pass my laugh test, right? But some of the things that they're proposing, I've got to give up a little bit of control over the learning. So what I required from their outputs is that they would deliver a managerial tutorial. This was essentially an outline I gave them where I asked them to respond to a handful of different prompts or topics that if you were, I'm going to say a decision maker in a company, project executive, a vice president, right? What might they need to know about whether or not they would implement this technology in the context where it makes sense or doesn't and the resources needed? Then they would also submit essentially a technical tutorial. So if I am another person using the software that you've specified, how do I replicate whatever you said you were going to do? So they have to do that as well. The last major bit they had for this was a video demonstration. So you said you were going to do this thing. Show me that you've done it. That's in most cases go on Zoom, click screen record, and they'd submit a recording of it. But I knew I'd have a bit of a challenge here, right? Because you've got a wide range of students, and some are going to say, I'm going to swing for the fences and I'm going to fully automate project management with artificial intelligence. Spoiler, they're probably not, right? But let them explore it, let them struggle with it. That's okay. Others are going to say, I'm going to game the system. I'm going to do something I've already done before, so I already know how to do it. Okay, it's sort of a waste of your time, but I won't know if you've already done something, right? So some of these I knew were going to be a challenge. So the last 10% of the grade that I had was essentially you had to document failures. So I had a screenshot and what happened, what went wrong, basically. And what I would say is if you pick something you already know, you still have to learn something new about it, or you're not eligible for full credit on this. Conversely, if you were someone that said, I'm going to fully automate project management with artificial intelligence, you're probably never going to be successful at that. But if you show me that you've gone over and above in terms of trying different things and solving for different things, and you put in more effort, document extra failures, you can get enough extra credit to offset every point you would have lost for missing that video. And again, I think the idea here was to embody failure. Failure is good for learning, I believe. And this was a way that I could put it into the grades where you had to fail or you could not get full credit. So big thanks to Karan Patel. He was really instrumental in leading this as well and developing it. I think it was good for the students. I think if you asked the students during the experience if it was good for them, you'd get much more mixed reviews. Fair warning if others take this. Last one I'll talk about here from failure, embodying failure is a Shark Tank we did with technology. Right. I wanted to talk to students about or offer students an opportunity to work on their skills for gaining buy-in. Right. So this is more about communication and persuasion. For you've got an idea. How do you get someone in your company to say, I'm on board. We're doing that. So we actually did a Shark Tank activity where students would pitch some new idea that they had. I would give them a project with different constraints and budgetary concerns and time constraints and this kind of thing. And then I'd bring in people from industry, senior level executives from industry to come in and give feedback to the students. From industry, unanimously, I got feedback that this is what we should be covering for our students. We want this. Not one person said anything negative. In fact, almost all of them said actively positive things about, I wish we had this in school. The students, however, felt not always the same, right? Because they're not used to this kind of challenge, right? They're not used to getting feedback like that's not good enough. A lot of these students have been high achievers all their life, and getting some of this feedback, it's not personal, but kind of blunt feedback of, you said this, how would you actually measure that? Oh, I don't know, right? This is kind of a challenge for some. So I think it was tricky, but I think it's ultimately good for their education. And again, an opportunity where that failure, that struggle can be really good. Big thanks to Chase Farnsworth on this. He's in Mortensen now. He's actually doing some really cool stuff with Mortensen. He's rising through the ranks there, but I got to teach with him for a number of years, and he was really instrumental in creating this. So again, I get back to this point of I think failure is good if we can learn from it. And so I think we need to kind of rebrand these things. So the points I want to talk about, right? What I hope I covered today. Again, I'm saying this like I'm saying it to you all, like you need to hear this, but it's not lost on me. I'm kind of pointing the finger at myself. These are things I was not particularly good at starting. So I think it's important to remember. Technology is just a tool to serve human users. Start with the problem. If you define a problem, you at least know whether your solution worked or not. Faculty should do less, not more, to support learning, right? I think we need to offer space in our curriculums and space in our classrooms and our class times where students can do more, and we set up the experiences to have them do more. I think we need to be seeing ourselves as coaches rather than just sort of distributors of tidbits of knowledge. And the last point I brought up is I think failure is good if you're willing to learn from it. So if you can set up experiences where you can brand failure as necessary or good or beneficial, I think it does a service for the students and anyone who embodies it. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time. Sort of my general closing slide, and thank you here. So maybe I'll stop sharing here in a minute. But I do want to thank you. If others have thoughts, I'm still figuring this out. So feel free to disagree or agree or yes and or whatever you got. But I'd love to hear from you in terms of your thoughts or suggestions.
Well, first, I think we should give a round of applause to Steve. Thank you so much. That was excellent, sharing the insights and all the models you tried over the years. Those just words of wisdom. I think all of us can get something out of this. Really appreciate that. I do want to encourage our in the audience to ask questions there. Steve, I have a couple of graduate students in this as well.
Okay.
And one of the reasons they've been actually, I'm actually jump right into the Q&A session already, is they have always been exactly like you mentioned earlier, like, technology is a tool. They have always been struggling as at a master level, what is a good question? What is a good problem to think about with solving, right? The problem solving aspect is that has always been pushing our students, hey, look into technology, look into the problem at hand there. But you seem to actually offer pretty safe, I would say, safe route or path to kind of actually look at the technology. But before you actually jump into technology too quickly, is look at the things you've been doing. So can you actually help our students, kind of like master students, when they are looking for topics or projects to jump in, what will be your recommendation for them?
Oh, that's good. Okay, so I'll give two thoughts. I don't know if I'm right here. This is what I tell mine. So if you had industry experience, this is for any of the grad students, I would start with what annoys you. Think of that experience. Like, what did you already do? That's the current status quo that you're like, this is annoying, or this is wasteful, or this is stupid. Anything where you're like, I don't like blah, blah, about that context. Explore that. Like, what about that did you not like? Was it time consuming? Was it prone to error? Was it unsafe? Were you set up to fail in a non-productive way? Like, what about that experience did you find to be annoying or problematic? Great starting point. So I think that could be a good one. Another thing that I would maybe offer, this is more pointing the finger at myself. I messed this up when I was a grad student. I set up a study for my advisor at the time where basically the pitch of the study was, wouldn't it be cool if we use this technology and blah, blah, blah. I would encourage you, I know I'm being recorded, so forgive me if this is slightly crass, but I would almost look at it and say, rather than wouldn't it be cool if, I would almost try to set up a study that says we are doomed. I'll use a slightly kind of, we're doomed unless, right? You're looking at the same thing. But if you can get to the point where you say, here are the ways in which this is going to cause problems unless we use technology to intervene. In doing that, you've kind of tacitly set up what are the indicators of success or failure. But wouldn't it be cool if, doesn't require metrics. What if I used an Apple Vision Pro in all of our construction projects? Yeah, what if you did it? How would we know if that was good, right? But if I start by saying we're doomed unless, then we can go through and we can actually say, what about that is problematic? So those would be my two suggestions. What do you say?
Excellent.
I'm curious. What's your advice? I was like learning from you. Can I ask you a question?
Well, I would argue really is, I agree with you 100% on the first point as well, is really just something you feel like you've been part of the industry that's speaking from yourself, put yourself as a user or as a participant of that community. Think it from that perspective. You are a actor in that network. I think that's really is what I believe in. And I strongly agree with you on everything. And the other piece is the doomed, and then what can be done. I think I like what you shared with me earlier when we actually talk about, ideas about original proposals. You always mention, with this is this and this we know A, we know B, but there's a but moment. I love that. I mean, I've been using that all the time myself. I'm trying to use that. I should pass that along to my students as well. Is I think that but moment is not a deal breaker. sometimes, yeah, it sounds like a deal breaker, yes, yes, but I think that's the beautiful moment when you actually think about a better way, a faster way, a more safer way to do things. I love that approach. Again, the 2 points were very well taken. I love those two, and I hope our students actually can really, keep those in mind. Thank you so much. I would open up the floor, questions to the floor. And please, you can either turn on your audio or you can just type the question in the chat. Either way, how would you like to make it happen?
Steve, I'll just say, as people are thinking of their questions, I really, really appreciated this presentation. It was amazing. And we've been doing this for the same amount of time, but I love that you really put thought into how to bring failure into your grading, which I haven't really taken that extra step yet. Just saying, hey, it's okay to fail. You can fail in my class. It's okay. I grade on effort until we get to the exams, but I like what you've done. I like that you've taken that extra step and actually built failure into your assignments. So I'm totally going to use this.
Take it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And did you find when you moved institutions, was it a good reset moment of like thinking about what do I want to keep? What do I want to get rid of? Because that's what,
Absolutely.
yeah, I
Yeah.
totally felt that in my process of it. I wasn't sure if that's universal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm teaching slightly different courses and we teach it in a different way. And I have different students. I'm in a different part of the US and working with different people. So, of course, I loved Washington State. I also love Roger Williams. So, yeah, definitely um, thinking about yeah, a little bit of a reset.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else wants to share what your reflection on this? To me, and Steve, we're going to talk a little more often. I want to borrow that the technology Shark Tank model so badly. I think we have a bunch of graduate students there. They are very into tech, but I want, because the model you came up with seemed to be the best way to engage students at least, and also welcome and actually encourage them to fail. I mean, that's really bold, but it's a bold vision. I think, I agree with the Ann 100% on this is, if you'd rather them fail now than later, and they'd rather fail, and then as long as you can learn something out of it, and that's really just words of wisdom, in my opinion. Any other questions from our audience? Please type in the chat or, just speak up, open up turn on your microphone, just speak.
Hey, Steven, this is Jeff Kim. Curious about the Shark Tank. I think that's a really neat idea, mainly because you're involving industry practitioners in, some part of the activity. But so curious a little bit more about how you technically work that out with the students. And, you mentioned that some students who are probably pretty successful in class maybe had a little bit of a shock when they got some feedback from industry. How did you work with situations like that, and maybe how did that work for your students as well?
Yeah. So when we started, I think the students had 2 or possibly 3 weeks to prep their ideas. So we would let them know the project class sessions in advance. We would give them work sessions in class. They'd come up with their idea. My co-instructor and I would sort of be the sharks initially, just talking to them, and we would try to pose questions like, what's the actual problem you're solving? How will you measure success? How much does this cost? Kind of floating out the kinds of questions they would get. In terms of the actual work with the sharks, that was just one session, right? So when COVID happened, this all went to Zoom. But even after COVID, we kept it on Zoom because what it enabled us to do was to use breakout rooms where the students could be in a room. We'd put a shark into the room. They'd do their pitches. I don't know exactly what feedback they'd get from the sharks, right? I know I've hand selected the sharks, so I have no questions about their credentials, but I don't know exactly what they discuss. They'd ask their questions. Then I'd pull the sharks out of the room and I'd give the students a couple minutes to debrief, right? In many cases, the first pitch was a train wreck. It was just, just complete failure, which is fine. Then they do another one that comes in. They do the same thing again. And then after we have kind of a debrief session as a group. In terms of the sharks involvement, right? They would invest points, right? Which don't tell students, but you all know points are a made up currency, right? There's no real value. Like we all agree, oh, there's value to points, but they don't cost us anything. So they would give points, but afterwards I'd give students a quiz, right? Where they would get some of the Sharks points that they got invested, but then they'd reflect on it too. So even if they got 0 points, just total crash and burn, what would you change? And I would still give them something to change and modify later. So that was kind of how I tried to embody, like, even if it really was a crash and burn, like, it doesn't matter. You'll be okay. You'll get some points back on this. So they'd invest points. And then the other part of your question was, how do I, or like, what was in the discussion? How did that work? Because they were in breakout rooms, I don't exactly know, but I kind of found myself, this is sort of part of my philosophy of the do less in teaching. Like I was like, I'll give up that control and I won't know exactly what they talk about. But while I give that up, right now, each team gets to have a dedicated shark and an in-depth discussion for 10 minutes or whatever. And I think they get a richer experience out of it. So that's kind of how we did it.
No, great. Okay. Yeah. I was taking lots of notes while you were talking. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Well, clearly it's something we stole anyway. We didn't invent Shark Tank. So that's why I feel like this is good for everyone. Take whatever bits apply to your respective.
Yeah, it's putting the ideas together that matters.
Yeah.
And that's a really great way to do that. So thank you.
So did they get to say, for that reason, I'm out?
What's that? Oh, for that reason. Yeah, right. I should.
One thing I wanted to bring up just before we do, if anybody else has any questions too, continue. But I was at the NIBS meeting last week in Washington, and just a note, which I think has some potential here, is that the other Steven Ayers, the former architect of the Capitol, who's acting president of NIBS right now, he changed the BIM Council to the Digital Technology Council. So it kind of expanded the thinking there a little bit. And the idea is to have projects that the BIM Council can take on. And the council will decide which projects they want to promote and things like that. And a couple of things that might be interesting is to, and what we're looking at also is trying to set up a laboratory with a building in the Washington area, and see if we can use that to, like you say, to see how we can improve the process, because we all know how, and it's a design build building, and we all know how the process typically works. But if you had to do it over again, how would you do it? Whether different contracting method, different approaches, different, and it's a situation where they have a model for design, they have a model for construction, and now they're trying to build a digital twin, and of course, they're starting from scratch each time, which is unfortunately the typical way that seems to be happening right now. And so we're saying, okay, what could happen? How could we get information to flow and things like that? So just to keep an eye on what's happening with that on that front. It might be of interest as we move forward. We'll see where it goes. But just to bring that tidbit of information to y'all.
Thanks for sharing. You see, Stephen, oftentimes we can only get those high up information from the Academy. We don't have that channel, and a big thank you for bringing that to our attention. Really appreciate that. I do see a question from the chat that Steve, can you actually address? It's one of the graduate students who asking the question. He's really, into VDC career path and things like that. And the students have been working with me, helping out big time in some of the classroom instructions and very tech savvy. So yeah, if you could actually offer some words of wisdom, and everybody else like Anne and Jeff, if you could actually offer your words of wisdom, it would be very helpful as well.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm right. I'll give, I don't know, wisdom is way too, yeah, I'll give food for thought is as strong as I would put this, or salt, 2 grains of salt or whatever the term is. So we did a study a number of years ago with industry asking about what they wanted in their students, and technical skills were very low on the list. Right? What they wanted were soft skills. They wanted communication. They wanted integrity. They wanted the stuff that isn't a part of a class. So your questions about what technical skills should you prioritize? I think the closest thing I would say for that is almost like I gave to my undergrads, is the skill of going from not understanding a technical workflow to understanding it. So the figure it out kind of gene or whatever, or that skill set or whatever that, go to YouTube and figure out, how do I get this product to work the way I want? How do I get it to import this model? That skill set of learning how to learn a thing will matter forever. But the specific, like if someone just tells you learn Revit or learn SketchUp or learn Bluebeam or whatever, I probably would discount that a little bit, because I think 5 years from now or 10 years from now, that won't matter as much. So I think learning how to learn as it relates to technical skills, that would be the most important skill set to have.
Excellent. And Jay, you're more welcome to jump in.
I agree, because every company is going to have its own requirements at the, various software platforms that they use. It's going to vary from company to company, from parts of the US. So yeah, I like what Steve said. Just understand how to learn, understand how to figure it out. When you get hired by someone, this is what they use. Okay, now figure it out. Easy peasy. And yes, when we ask industry people what they want people who can work with other people, people who can communicate. Yeah, that's what we hear a lot. So I'm just saying, I agree, Steve, 100%.
Excellent. Yeah, that's just another testimonial about what industry people want right now. So excellent. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that, I won't say much different from the other two. I think that communication is a big deal. One thing that maybe from my time in industry, anybody that could figure out creatively how to solve problems were way more successful in different outcomes. Not always the case, but also too, there's always this kind of uphill battle to fight when it comes to talking about technology, particularly in the construction industry, I find. And I think a little bit of the communication comes into play there, but a level of persuasiveness and conviction in the fact that some technologies are going to really make the industry better. And then there's a lot of it that's out there that's just, we haven't figured it out yet. So I agree with Steve saying that, don't go just learn Revit and think that's going to bring you all the way through things. A lot of companies will take care of that for you when you go to those organizations. So my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. I want to give opportunity to other folks in the audience, like Musber and Fang and Tulu. If you guys have any comments, reflection, or want to jump in to help the students out as well, feel free to speak up. We're actually almost on time, but I do want to address to the floor and make sure that everybody get the questions or reflections done. Any other comments?
I'll just add one more thing: persistence. Having coached teams over the years, competition teams, the students who say, I can't do this and give up, those are the teams that are going to be at the bottom and are not going to be very successful. So if you just persist, that you can figure this out and just figure out a way to do it, regardless of how you do it. Just figure out a way to do it. Those are the teams that are more successful.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. And again, thank you, Steve, again, for sharing us a wonderful presentation. And this, I think, it really is, inspiring. And and Jay, I wanted to extend an invitation to you guys. Consider actually doing one webinar for us in the future as well when you get a time. And we're always looking for those inspirational speakers and our leaders in our field. All right. Again, thank you, everyone. Excellent. Yeah, we'll reach out for sure. I'm definitely not shy for doing that. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to be taking a couple months off, but start up again in the fall, right?
Yep. Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks,
everyone. Thanks,
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.